Hey there, in this video we are going to look at a special question type where we evaluate variables within formulas and equations. So we are going to take a look at some equations, and we are going to be given an equation with several variables, and we are also going to be given some values for those variables, and then we are going to go ahead and plug in those values for those variables into the equation, and then we're going to always be solving for the remaining variable in the equation. So let's take a look at example 1 here. We're going to solve for the unknown variable in each equation. So here we are finding k, as you can see on this bottom line. So they give us an equation, Lm equals khw. Remember, if there's no operation in between, that means multiplication. So L times m, k times h times w. They tell us that L has a value of 400, m is worth or has a value of 0.4. H is 2, and W is 32. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in to this equation given the values that we have below. So L is going to be 400 times M, which is 0.4, equals, then K is unknown. We don't know what K is, so I'm going to leave that as K for now, times H, which is 2, times W, which is 32. So that's the first step, to always just plug in all the values that you have, because then you should only have one variable left, and our goal is to get this variable by itself. So following our order of operations, and then once we get it simplified, we'll use our inverse operations to get k by itself. But first, again, we're going to do the 400 times 0.4. If you do 400 times 0.4, you get 160. And then over here, 2 times 32. That is 64k. And then once we have that, then we can go ahead and use our inverse operations to get k by itself. So to start to get k by itself, we are going to divide both sides by 64. That way it isolates k. 160 divided by 64 comes out to be 2.5. So the value of k is 2.5. So let's take a look at number 2. So in number 2, they give us a slightly more complicated equation. So we see this right here. And they give us the values of A, B, C, and D. And then we are finding E. So we can see in this equation right here, we can go ahead and plug in for A, B, C, and D. So starting with this first fraction, we have A, which is -2, over B minus C. B is -4, then minus, and then our C is -6. Notice that is a double negative. So here in the next step, when we start to simplify, that will become -4 plus 6 because it is a minus minus, or double negative. And then we have the plus sign, and then we have our second fraction, which is B times C minus D on top. B is -4. Then we have parentheses C minus D. So C is -6, and then minus D, which is -3. So again, we have a double negative there, which will eventually turn into a plus. And then on the denominator, we have B minus D. So B is -4, minus, and then D again is -3, another double negative. And then that equals E. So this one, while the fractions make it a little more complicated compared to the previous one, it really is pretty similar to what we're doing, or what we did on number 1. We are going to simplify what we can. And then in this case, it's actually even simpler in that last final step because E is already by itself. So we won't have to do any inverse operations on this one to get E by itself. But even if you don't see that yet, as you're looking, we can go ahead and just start to simplify. So -4 minus -6 will become -4 plus 6. So that double negative turns into -4 plus 6. So we have -2 on top and then -4 plus 6 on bottom, which comes out to be 2. Then we have the plus, and then we have our second fraction. So with that second fraction, I'm going to go ahead and simplify what's in the parentheses first. So that's going to be this -6 minus -3. That becomes -6 plus 3 because that double negative turns into a plus. So we have -4 parentheses -6 plus 3 is -3. All of that is over -4 minus -3. Double negative turns into a plus, so this is -4 plus 3. and that comes out to be -1, and then that equals e. Now, when you continue to simplify, we want to look at each fraction individually. So -2 divided by 2 simplifies to -1. Plus, we want to simplify the top here. -4 times -3 becomes 12. Still divided by -1, and then equals e. And then we can go ahead and simplify one step further. 12 divided by -1 becomes -12. So this is -1 plus -12, or in other words, -1 minus 12, however you want to look at it. And again, that's equal to e. So then our final step is just to combine those -1 and -12, those constants, and we get -13 is what e is equal to. So that is our answer on number 2. All right, number 3, another one where we're given an equation and multiple variables, but what's a little bit different about this one is that we're actually given 2 equations. So we're given y equals x over d and x equals m over d. So let's go ahead and let's look at what they do give us, the values that they give us, which are m and d. So we're able to plug in m and d, but we don't know what x or y are. And they're not actually asking us for x, but in order to find y, you'll notice once we get into the problem that you will need to find x in order to find y. So a couple ways that you can approach this. One way is to start with each of these equations separately. So if we have y equals x over d and x equals m over d, one option is to just plug into both equations and go ahead and set up what you can. So for example, here we see y equals x over d. So we can go ahead and plug in what we know. And again, the only thing we know in that equation is d, and we know the value of d is 3. So y equals x over 3 we can start with. Now, because there's 2 variables, we're not going to be able to solve that equation quite yet because we would need another 1 variable, either x or y, in order to be able to solve for the other remaining variable. But we have this second equation. So in that second equation, we can go ahead and plug in for m and for d because we know both of those values. So we have x equals m, which is 18, over d, which is 3. And we can go ahead and solve for x. So x is going to be equal to 18 divided by 3. 18 divided by 3 is 6. So that gives us 6 for the x value. Even though they weren't asking for x, that helps us because now we can come back and we can plug into y equals x over 3. And that x is going to now be 6. So we're going to have y equals 6 over 3, which we can now solve because we only have 1 variable remaining. We just have y equals. So y equals 6 divided by 3, which is 2. And so that is your final answer on this one. Y is equal to 2. So we had to use that secondary equation to find x, plug it into the first equation here, and be able to find y. Since originally that first equation, we only had 1 variable given and 2 unknowns, and we needed another variable to plug in here. So that's why we use that second equation and use that to find y. So in summary, we always want to start by plugging in the values that you know. If you can start by doing that, that's going to kind of lessen the overwhelmingness of looking at all those letters and all those values that are given. And then once you do that, you always want to work to get the remaining variable by itself. And again, sometimes you're going to have to use inverse operations to do that. Sometimes you won't, but sometimes you will. So just be ready for that. And then finally, this third reminder is just don't let the many letters and numbers that we see overwhelm you when you first start that problem. So again, if you always just plug in the values that you know, it's going to make it more bearable and a little bit easier to work with.